Welcome. It's the second of our 3 webinars with Cricket Scotland this week, following on from World Mental Health Day. And the topic this evening is helping a teammate. So what I'm going to share is some ideas and some strategies that can help you help someone who's close to you. And when I say teammate, that of course could be someone at work, a member of your family. It doesn't have to be cricket based, but for a lot of us it will be that our close friends are those that we play cricket with. But as a little bit of an intro, there's 2 things here which I think are the most important, and for anyone who was at the webinar yesterday will remember this hopefully, is that I'm a passionate believer in doing something. We can all talk a great game, be it cricket or anything else, about how we're there for people and how we want to support them. But what makes the difference time after time is actually doing it. And it doesn't have to be anything revolutionary or something that reinvents the wheel, just the very basics that we're all capable of. But it's a struggle sometimes to cut through different conversations to say, are we going to be there for the people that matter most to us when they need it? So hopefully some of the things I'm going to talk about maybe get people to do a little more of what they're doing, or to think about things in a slightly different way. And I come at this from the perspective of cricket. The worst times in my life that I've had have been made so much easier to deal with by the presence of cricket and a team sport. And I'm sure people who are listening would find that as well. But to be completely honest, I also found myself at times feeling let down by not getting support, and retrospectively maybe looking at it and realizing, I put up barriers, I put up walls and so on. But that kind of thing has motivated me as the years have gone on to think, right, what could be done better in a sport, in an area which is so full of promise for being able to support people the very best that we can. And there, of course, as a fan of Warwickshire County Cricket Club, 2 fine South African bowlers who came over at different times and played for them. 2 quotes that really, really got me when I first came across them in this context. This one from Desmond Tutu, I think really encapsulates what can be the relationship with mental health and looking after people that we have in this world, that we wait for there to be a problem, that we're, in this analogy, pulling them out of the river, hoping they can survive, when in actual fact, the more we're waiting for that to happen, the more it's going to happen. Rather, we should be further upstream, as the Archbishop said, to then be seeing, well, what is it that's happened? Why is it that someone's in this difficulty? Can we do things that are actually really good for our mental health, which can actually translate into improved performance at work, on the pitch, whatever it be, and encourage people to think about mental health much more proactively and positively? Because I know the conversation can be restricted by thinking mental health is all about difficulties and problems that people have. Maybe that's something we don't want on our plate. So this attitude of really trying to see early on and intervene, so it's not a crisis that you're responding to, but in fact day-to-day things that we can do. So that's one of the quotes that really got me when I first came across it. The other, more recently, is this one from the outgoing All Blacks coach Steve Hansen. He said this at the end of the Rugby World Cup, and this got me as well. The Kiwis, the All Blacks, are fantastic advocates for teamwork, communication, lots of things that we would really want to be promoting. But this, his way of phrasing it, really, really struck a chord with me. This idea that we need to give people that permission. We can't just sit there and say, I'm available, speak to me. We actually need to make that permission that they can speak much more explicit. Let people know without any doubt that we're there for them. Because as he says, it takes a lot for people to be vulnerable. If people express some vulnerability, some difficulty, and it's not received well, that might be it. That might be it. Shut off. They're not going to try that again. So giving people that permission is what it's all about for me, and getting there early to say to people, this is this is someone you can speak to, whether that be an individual or whether that be in a club environment or anything else. So these are the two things that I'm going to thread what I'm saying through in this next sort of 15 or 20 minutes. And for those just joining, please use the chat tab if you have any questions or any comments. It's great to hear from people in this setting. So when we think of mental health, we can think of it particularly as just the problems. In this period of COVID, we're getting a lot of conversations about the impact on people's mental health, the impact on well-being and problems that are being stored up. And absolutely, that does need to be discussed. There's a lot going on in the world that needs to be addressed regarding funding for mental health care and lots of very critical things like that. But we have to be as equally aware that mental health operates on a continuum, where at the top, we've got our optimal, our best mental health, we're thriving, fantastic. And then at the bottom, we've got our very worst. But as this diagram shows, it's not as straightforward as sort of saying a diagnosed disorder means it's really bad mental health, or absence of that means it will be really good. I'm sure we all know of people who are in, at the moment, a tough time, but they might not be someone who has a clinically treated disorder. It might just be that it's a rough time. It's a time in their life. It's something with relationships, it's with work, and their mental health is not at its best. We can also have people who, of course, have a mental illness, who have a diagnosis, and they found ways of coping with it and are enjoying fantastic mental health. You know, I've put myself as an example of sorts here, in that I've had multiple episodes of clinical depression over the last, I left university in 2007. That's the first time. Most recently, back in 2018. But as time's gone on, I've been able to learn how to spot the signs, be able to work my way through it. So I put myself in, mental health is going pretty well, but there is that aspect of mental illness that is there somewhere. So everyone's on that chart, if you like, somewhere. But there's things we can do to influence it positively. There's also things, of course, that can influence it negatively. So in terms of helping our friends or helping our teammates, if we start at that positive bit, the ways to well-being are out there. They're fairly well mentioned in mental health conversations when people are being positive and proactive. But each and every one that is on that screen there can be achieved directly through cricket. We've got the connecting aspect, the team sport, the social aspect, the training. We spend so much time with each other. League cricket can take you across the whole county. You travelling for 90 minutes or so to get to a game. If you're playing at a representative level, even further, if you're playing professionally, etc., etc. Cricket also requires us to keep learning, to keep innovating, to pick up the pieces from what maybe has gone wrong and move forward with that. We take notice within cricket, or at least we should, of our surroundings and what's going on. Give, just another word for how we care for each other. And being active, of course, in a sport like ours is something that's there. So those things, in that half a minute little brief on it, are building blocks for us to be able to help ourselves and others to say, right, what can we do? These things are put forward by any health service in the world. Anyone who works in an area of mental health would, whether they use the same words as these or others, would recognise them as being things that promote good mental health. So if we can use them within cricket, talk about them and say these are positives that we can work on, then I think that is a big step towards doing what Desmond Tutu was saying, in getting further upstream and seeing earlier on if there's problems and how we can help people flourish rather than just avoid mental ill health. Something I talk a lot about in sessions with clubs and players is the stress bucket. People may be familiar with the concept that we all have a bucket in this sense, and we all have things that are going in it which are causing us stress. But we also all should have a tap which releases some of it. So in this model, we're not saying that we can completely avoid stress and tension and discomfort. I don't think anyone can do that. But what we're saying is we accept what's coming in and we see how maybe we can deal with it. What are our releases? So I was talking to some players, earlier on this year, it seemed like a long year, about this. We're saying, right, they're young players at a county academy, they're talking about the pressures of their schoolwork clashing with their sporting commitments, forming relationships, interactions with their parents, their peers. So all this stuff's going in. But then the really uplifting thing that we did was say, well, what can we do to maybe release that? What makes us feel good? And a lot of the time, the real basics, they would just remind themselves of saying, well, actually, when I'm feeling overwhelmed, talking about it helps, or having a break from it, and so on. So that's something we can talk to with our friends. We can look with our teammates, perhaps proactively, in the build-up to a season and say, in a cricket context, what fills your bucket? What is it that causes stress, anxiety, tension when you're playing, and how can we release it? But also extend that into our lives as well. But cricket might be a really good hook for us to work from. If someone is struggling with, particularly at a time like this, anxiety is shown to be on the rise, helping people with their routine can make a big difference. I found this to be the most enduring thing that I have done in terms of getting better from having struggled a lot. And this doesn't mean planning out every minute of your day, but having some structure, having some routine gives you something that you can control and you have agency over, rather than feeling like your life is completely out of control. So again, within a cricket context, that can be a big part of it. People can build their week around the fact that they've got that game of cricket, or they've got training then, or they've got something with it. And we can be a part of that. If someone is struggling with anything, we need to be open to give someone some support with that, and not look past something which we might consider really basic, like organising our time. You know, when things are going well, we don't think twice about it. But if we have a friend, a teammate who is struggling and it really isn't going well for them, some support in that area, not to do their diary for them, but maybe to remind them of things that are coming up, and to say, well, actually, why don't we do this? And one of the great things, again, the simplicity is always the thing that wins, that I've found over these last couple of years, is making that support in the nicest way possible to be not a choice, not leaving it up to someone and saying the old favourite, if you need anything, let me know. How many times in our lives has someone actually let you know after that? You know, perhaps when someone's lost someone close to them, we say, if there's anything you need, just let me know. Now, having been in that position myself, like we all have at some times in our lives, you don't feel like you can take them up on that offer. A much better way is, of course, to then say, would you like to come out on Tuesday for a cup of coffee? We'll have a chat about it, or I'll do this for you. Make the offer one that they kind of can't refuse. Of course, this is something which is very obvious to all of us, but sometimes just these little reminders are the ones that makes the light bulb go and say, that's how I can maybe get through to someone. I'm going to pause in a second just to see if there are any comments or any questions or things that people might want to share themselves. But this slide isn't about saying, you know, let's get on the beers and go from there. More to say, in actual fact, some of the signs and things that we can maybe spot within people are ones where we have that opportunity to be able to make a really impactful difference. Alcohol in cricket, in this country, on the British Isles, is certainly a big part of it for a lot of people. Club revenues are often dependent on that, or largely dependent on it. So I'm not saying to completely, you know, knock the drinking on the head, but what can be seen a lot of the time in a sign that something isn't going quite right would be where someone is indulging in more risky behaviours, maybe is using alcohol a lot more, or is behaving differently with it. So that can be an awkward conversation to say to someone. It feels like you're challenging them on over a lifestyle decision, but that might be something, and it could be to say, from your own experience, you know, oh, when I was feeling bad, you know, I probably drank too much to try and get away from it. You know, is that something you've experienced? However you'd feel like wording it, because alcohol is a depressant. It is something that has very clear links to mental illness. Sometimes it can be that it's traced as a cause of a decline in mental health, or it can be something then which is a symptom of it. Either way, it is something for us to consider, particularly in an environment where alcohol can be very, very prevalent from there. And I say this as someone who, I was, from the age of 16 to 32, that was my favourite hobby. You know, world-class drinker. Now I've made the decision, like many others, that it doesn't work for me. And it was a big trigger for me in some of the worst times. But that's, of course, for everyone to work out. But having some appreciation that that is a potential problem can be useful. I've got a question in here from John. Can you give examples of creating a situation as to how to open up the dialogue? Yeah, excellent question. I think what we're looking at in those kind of situations, John, is to make, if it's a conversation with an individual, to make the approach to it as natural as we can, to make it perhaps something which is part of what we might already be doing, so that they don't feel like they're being put on the spot. Along with that, a lot of the best practice would be around making it something that is a bit more private. We don't want it screaming perhaps across the changing room or what have you. But during that conversation, I found saying it in a bit, a coaching role. Can you come out? Can you give me a hand picking up these cones? And as that's going on, to do that. In terms of the way of doing that, we want to be thinking. It's hard to know maybe how to start the conversation. My tip from speaking to so many people about this over the years is really just to try and not to think too much about it, and to find a way of saying, really, how are you? Showing that you care is something that is so important here. And just saying, I've noticed you're not quite yourself. Is everything okay? And that gives them that permission to then speak about it. It might be that someone then would say, no, I'm fine, and nothing. But having said that, it will have told them that you're someone that they can speak to. And the amount of times I've had people saying they had that conversation, they didn't really open up, and they felt it hadn't worked. But then in a couple of weeks, that person did say, oh, actually, would it be okay if we had a chat about it? So creating the situation, make it natural, make it private, but not so much of the case that people see you going off to a quiet corner and everyone's wondering what's happening. So keeping it nice and natural within that. So yeah, John's saying here, often the other person's awareness is heightened to any potential intervention. It's a fine line. Yeah, absolutely. And I can speak from my own experience and others that talking about something will be right down your list of things you want to do if you're really struggling, for all kinds of reasons, feeling that actually you might deserve to be in this situation, that person doesn't care, that they're going to ridicule you. All kinds of things could be going around their head. So I think it is a fine line, and that's why, if at all possible, we want to have environments where we make it explicit from the get-go that if someone is having a struggle, that there is the opportunity to speak about it. We're not waiting for it to be a big problem like this. But of course, there will be times where this does happen, where people need that bit of extra support there. So yeah, I'll come back to aspects of that a little bit later, but thank you for that. I think that's often what people want to find out from this. Jamie said, how can you support someone who is already getting clinical support? Yeah, great question as well. With this, there is a temptation for people to think, well, they're seeing their doctor, or they're seeing a therapist, or they've got some medication, it's kind of job done. I think there we're reminding someone that we're there for them and we're still patient, and that hopefully they are on the road towards some recovery and feeling better, but we are there. Perhaps at that point, we are there to maybe make things a bit more normal, because a lot of their life may have been around, dragging around how they're feeling, and it making a really big impact on how they live their life. So supporting someone who's getting that clinical support might be about saying, not ignoring the issue, but trying to make things a little bit more normal again. Chat about things that maybe aren't the illness or aren't the problem that they're going through, but still showing that you care within that, and showing an interest. I recall speaking to a player once who just started seeing a doctor and had just started their medication, but they hadn't felt the effect of it yet. And they were wanting to get that off their chest. They were very nervous about the fact that they'd sought this help and they weren't getting better. So for someone to say, well, okay, maybe in time, what did they say? What does it say in your leaflet and so on? So just being an ear for them in that sense, I think, can be really, really helpful. Now, this leads me on what we've been saying there to how we talk about these things. And my belief, probably the thing I believe more than anything else in the world, is how that communication needs to run through everything that we do. Communication is the key. The best sports teams in the world, the best businesses, the best anything in the world, their communication is absolutely on point, spot on. So what we're wanting to do is make these conversations and make conversation something that we do more of. We're as guilty as anyone, I'm sure, in this call, I'm the same, of thinking communication is just through this mobile phone, when in actual fact, the best things are face-to-face in their company with people. COVID's challenged that. We're getting, hopefully, in a lot of ways away from that eventually. We can, of course, still use these other forms of communication, but what are we doing to make an environment whereby what Mitchell Marsh talked about in the Test, the Amazon Prime series, and if people haven't seen it, definitely watch it. And he talks there, you might have missed this with all this stuff going on otherwise. He said at the beginning of each day on their tour of England, he'd go out for a walk and a cup of coffee, and anyone who wanted to was welcome to join him. This is a brilliant yet simple technique for helping your teammates and fostering a supportive environment for people's well-being. It's not saying, if you're struggling, we'll go out for a cup of coffee. It's saying, let's go out anyway, let's talk. And it might be that they're just talking about the weather, what's going on in the Aussie rules, whatever it is, fluffy stuff like that. Or it could be that someone's homesick. It could be that they're having a problem and so on. But he, in that really simple act, gave everyone there permission to talk. So when I revisit this, I think about it and go, well, how am I giving my friends or my teammates the permission to talk? How can I foster that? To say, don't wait until it's a problem. Give them that permission that Hanson talks about a lot earlier. And I think this is what leads to situations like the one which Justin Langer refers to here with Glenn Maxwell. He built up a relationship, just like we do with our friends, our teammates, our colleagues. And he said, underneath the mask, when you build relationships with people, you sense when they're not quite right. We don't need to walk around with a list of things and saying, right, what's a sign that I need to tick off and say, right now, I know there's a problem. We get an instinct for it when someone's a bit off, the way they respond, the way they are. So he asked Glenn the day before a game, that's when he said, I probably need to have a bit of a chat. Now, I'm pretty sure that if the only time these people spoke to each other about how they're feeling was when things have gone really badly, then that wouldn't have been an option. Instead, that was a proactive measure. It did lead to Glenn Maxwell taking some time out from playing international cricket, but that would be the same as someone proactively taking time out because of another form of injury or susceptibility to an injury or illness. So I thought that was able to give us a brilliant example of that, of just knowing people that little bit more, investing that little bit more time and getting those questions in about how people are feeling. If it's someone that you are close to, you can probably throw it in without the worry of it being received awkwardly. Sort of try it on and say, how are you feeling? How did that make you feel? And particularly for the men amongst us, that might make you think, what the heck's going on here? But showing that we care early on, I think, can make such a big difference there. And I realise I'm repeating myself, but a bit of reinforcement always works. Let's also remember that we are part of a team, and no one who's supporting a teammate should feel like they've got to do it on their own and feel like it's a burden. I mean, that there is a risk of that, certainly. People may be looking in a group and saying, oh, well, this guy is into that, so, you know, he'll be the one who can talk to them. It can be very draining to listen to the woes of someone else. Of course it can. We're only human. So it's important then that maybe you, as someone who's helping, has someone to help you, and we can make use of that whole team environment there. And maybe you, as that individual or a pair of you, can be what is referred to sometimes as the cultural architects. So I heard this from a sports psychologist, Paul Russell, who's now the Premier League referees sports site, so he's got a pretty interesting job. But he was talking about someone who worked with Sven-Göran Eriksson when he was England football manager, and they talked about cultural architecture and saying so much of what happens in a group will be dictated by the example of 2 or 3 key people. If those 2 or 3 key people are the right kind of people, that can lead to all kinds of brilliant stuff. If they are not the right characters, then it can lead to that. So are you in that position where you can be a cultural architect for people being more open, for being more approachable, for letting people know that actually I don't just care about you when we're going out having a good time. I don't just care about you when things are brilliant, when it's birthdays, when it's Christmas, when it's a win at cricket. I care about you when things aren't going so well and everything in the middle. So I'm sure we may well be aware of this statistic that 1 in 4 people are affected by a mental health problem in any year. And these statistics are, of course, quite often difficult to relate to, because we can sometimes think it might be more than that. How do they measure this kind of thing? But it certainly illustrates to us that this is something which can affect pretty much anyone. It does not discriminate. I remember an example of Aaron Lennon, professional footballer, England international, on however much money a week, was had some time out from football due to if we call it a mental injury. And one of the newspapers had a headline on their online site saying £60,000 a week, England footballer Aaron Lennon. And then it talked about him being having a standoff with the police, and it was eventually taken to hospital because of how unwell he was. Now, everything about that headline didn't sit right with me. I remember reading further after, and standoff with the police sounds like it's very violent, it's very tense. In actual fact, he was very distressed, and the police were the people who responded to that, having had a call. And actually it was just a conversation to try and get him to go and get some help. But the amount of money he's on a week has absolutely no bearing whatsoever. Having that money did not insulate him from having an injury in this part of his body. And in fact, he was interviewed afterwards and was talking about this. And one of the things that had stopped him getting help earlier, and lots of high-profile sports people or people in all walks of life, what can sometimes stop them getting help is thinking that, well, actually, I've got a good life. I shouldn't be feeling like this. I feel guilty for doing that. And of course, that makes it worse. The phrase came up in Aaron's case and also Clark Carlisle's case of, he's a millionaire, what's he got to be depressed about? That logic, if we extend it and say, well, Steve Jobs was a billionaire, that didn't stop him dying. Freddie Mercury sold 20, 30 million records in his lifetime, didn't stop him dying earlier than we might have expected. So those kind of things, that stigma, which has been really challenged by a lot of great things in society, we can still work on there. Because if our mate thinks that we're not going to take it seriously because superficially they've got a good life, then that's going to be a little bit of a problem for us. So the best thing we can do is listen. But one of the worst things we do as human beings is listen. I include myself in that. A lot of the time we're waiting when someone's speaking, we're waiting for them to finish so that we can start talking, and we haven't actually listened to it. But the gift of actually just listening to someone, not trying to problem solve for them, not necessarily giving them advice, just listening when someone wants to speak is beautiful. And a little tip that I would pass on if people are thinking, in a situation like that, they're not sure of where to go and so on, is this one. Once a person pauses, I count to 3 in my head. It gives them time to elaborate further if they need to. It also shows you thinking about what they're saying, which will hopefully give them confidence to keep talking. Little bits and pieces like that can be really useful. Not butting in to say, oh, right, okay, just letting them go and letting that go. Another one, if someone is perhaps not saying too much for a while, a little question. What are you thinking? Giving them a chance then to reflect a little bit more. Something that I would recommend as well, again, from what I've picked up over these years with people in various settings, is a little summary of what someone said can make a big difference to say at the end of when they've been talking. So if I've understood this right, you're saying that you're really struggling to sleep, that your appetite's completely gone, you're not enjoying your job, which you usually do, and you're finding it difficult to have the energy to train. Is that fair? Something like that reassures the person that you've been listening, but also frames it in a way that they might not be thinking of it in their head as it stands from there. So there's just 3 things that I would say, but also trust yourself. If you're the person who's cares enough to want to speak to them and get them to unload to you, then you'll find that way. And of course, we always say things where we think, oh, I don't think quite word that quite right, but you being genuine and being authentic will be the biggest thing within that situation. And I think the key as I move towards the end here is that we need to be patient. Things won't necessarily get better overnight. Some conversations that you have with people, and we know this from loads of experience, that almost just that chat, bang, they'd be like, yeah, okay, right, I'm fine. If that's perhaps something that's in cricket terms, something that might just be purely to do with the game and something they're doing. It might be something that needs to blow off a bit of steam about a bad day they've had at work or so on. If that's left as it is, it could build to something else. But if someone is really going through a bad time and he's unwell, that patience is a really great gift that we can give them by saying to them, not just giving up maybe when they don't return your call or when they're maybe a bit offhand, but as nicely as you can, letting them know that you are there for them and keeping updated. And Jamie's question about how you can support someone who's already getting clinical support, that clinician who is helping them, that's a professional relationship and they'll have all the expertise and so on, but they'll also want a friend. They'll also want someone they can talk to more informally and not have to attend at a certain time. Maybe it's a bit more ad hoc. So the patience there is really, really, really important. So some things to finish to sort of signpost you towards. Pointing out the bloody obvious here, but the doctors, the NHS, are just as much there for your mental health as they are your physical health. Even in times of COVID, there are mental health services in all parts of the United Kingdom, and they really are the people who are able to make that help. And yes, we do hear about how there's long waiting lists for things and so on and so forth, but even more the case then that we should be proactive and say, right, well, the sooner we seek that support, the better. And they open up that suite of options, whether it be medication for someone, whether it be some talking therapy, whether it's even just nudging towards some things that are sustainably good for you, like some more exercise and so on. But also, people may wish, whether it's something that is a diagnosed disorder or just a difficult patch of their life, to speak with someone, to speak to a counsellor or a therapist. That's still, I would say, an area that we might back off from, particularly as men, and say, oh, well, it doesn't, talking to a therapist can make the biggest difference going. And it's a great sign of strength to be able to say, if this is something difficult and something that other people shy away from, if you do it, surely that's a point of strength. And we can help our friends with that and say, point them towards counselling directory. Say you'll help them with a search, have a look with them, that kind of thing. But my final one, and I think this is something that everyone can go away and do, whether tonight or another time, and this is to help not only friends, but perhaps anyone you come into contact with. Zero Suicide Alliance do a free online 20-minute piece of training, which you can access via the link there, which I found to be fantastic, very clear, very positive, but very practical. And that can just give you that little bit more confidence about how to engage in what could be a difficult conversation. And I think if you're able then to have confidence to be able to prevent a suicide potentially, then if we kind of roll that back, talking to someone who's having a difficult time but is by no means in that kind of situation, we might be able to feel we can do that from there. So as I conclude, I hope I've been able to get across what I was intending to this evening. Part of what Open Up Cricket is all about, and that is the conversation. It's not weak to speak. Some of the ideas that I've given there may be new ways of looking at it, or just turning the coin the other way around. The key, I think, as I said at the beginning, as I always say, is just have that intent. I would hope, and I'd be so fulfilled by having done this evening, if someone did go away and have a conversation with someone, whether it be someone who's struggling, or just talk about this and saying how we can support each other. It's not about learning a lot of new things. The very technical things will be done by definition by those who are professionals in those areas. But us as people who come into contact with our teammates, our friends, our work colleagues, our family, it's about having that intent. But to be able to do that, we need confidence to be able to do it. So I hope some of these ideas are things that people can follow up. If there are any questions, please put them in the chat. I'll hang around for a few minutes for that. But otherwise, I appreciate you giving up your time. I hope it has been useful. I will email out to everyone some follow-up resources just to keep you thinking, either tonight or tomorrow. But otherwise, good night. Thank you.